Manuel Gonzalez was Albuquerque's poet laureate from 2016 to 2018. He began his career in the Poetry Slam and has represented Albuquerque 4 times as a member of the award-winning Albuquerque Poetry Slam team. After working in Albuquerque's poetry community for 6 years, Manuel began to use slam poetry to help local youth find positive and constructive ways to deal with life's pressures. He began teaching workshops on self-expression through poetry in high schools, youth detention centers, and also started facilitating art therapy programs to help at-risk and incarcerated youth. In 2014, Manuel started Low Riding at El Chante, a free bi-monthly writers group open to all members of the community. He continues his passion for helping others heal and express themselves through poetry. Manuel has appeared on the PBS show Colores, My Word is My Power, and on Colores September 23rd, 2017, and has 2 previous collections of poetry, But My Friends Call Me Burque and Homeboy. And his
Órale.
3rd collection, Duende de Burque, Albuquerque Musings, is featured in today's reading. Currently, Manny is working as a consultant with the University of New Mexico Chicana Chicano Studies program. And I'm so happy to present Manuel Gonzalez.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's always uncomfortable for me to sit and listen to my bio like that. And so my wife teases me to help me get through it. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm honored, and just my heart is so full to be able to share a little bit of this new book with you. Now, this new book that I got published with the laureate series was a little bit different than other books that I've written. This one, not only does it have the poetry that I've written, but some of it has a little bit of the stories behind why I wrote some of the poems. So I think I'd like to start our little session today by sharing a poem with you, if you don't mind. Now, I'm going to read the little bit that I wrote about this, because this is the first poem in the book, and it's about Burque. Like, some of us from Albuquerque don't always say Albuquerque. Some of us say Burque, and that's why the title of my book is Duende de Burque, because those of us from here, you're like, bro, were you in Santa last week? Nah, bro, I was in Burque, and that's just how we talk. And so people from, I don't know, Boston or somewhere might have never heard the word burque until they encounter this book. And so I think that's cool. But when I became poet laureate, I knew that I had to represent burque, her magic, her culture, all the beauty that we have here that is only here and is unique here. And see, as poet laureate, my job was to show people in Albuquerque the beauty of poetry. And then when I would go outside Albuquerque, I would show people that were in other places the beauty that we have here. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what it's like to be from New Mexico or Albuquerque specifically. So this first poem I'm going to share with you is kind of how I see the beauty of Burque. It's how I see how we live our lives in that way. And I wrote it in the late summer, and so we'd been hot for a long time. And so the title of this poem is Burque Summer Solstice. Summertime heat creates mirages off the asphalt, playing tricks on our eyes. Burque and her secrets are whispered in the wind when we listen. Paletas and sticky smiles on faces of mocosos running without a care in the world. The elders know where to find escape from the hot Zia sun. The river finds her home in the bosque, where we can find solace and solitude, silence in the middle of a bustling metropolis, Burque, where the thirst of the tierra is quenched by late afternoon monsoons, sun shining through the raindrops like diamonds. Precious gems of our memories, the smell of rain, flashbacks of puddle jumping. We celebrate the rain in the desert like a long lost friend returning home. The streets shine new and clean after the flood recedes. But our parents still tell the children about La Llorona to keep us safe, keep us away from those deadly ditches, the arroyos, the acequias that carry our dreams to irrigate the milpas in the South Valley, growing the same corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that were introduced to our ancestors long ago. The acequias carry dreams to quench the thirst that feed us, and until our panzas are llena and our corazón is contento. Well, while dragonflies dance in the amber light of sunset, Burque, so full of history and culture, inviting, welcoming with pride, orgullo. And our skies, as big as our imaginations, hold clouds like floating cathedrals, or carry hot air balloons on crisp mornings, listening to KABQ while we clean house, two-stepping with a broom as Tiny Maury or Al Hurricane or Manny and the Casanovas play in the background New Mexico music. Born and bred like calabacitas with corn and green chili, our homemade tortillas, Albuquerque, where we honor our traditions and our history, sage smoke and chimayo chili. Fishing at Tingley Beach early in the morning before even the ducks wake up. Burque is who we were. It's who we are. It's the legacy that we pass down to our children, like cruising Central, old Route 66 on a Sunday afternoon in a 63 Chevy, original and clean, playing oldies, those oldies that remind us of how far we've come, cruising all the way to the South Valley Gardens, growing community, unearth our Zia sun, blazing in the sky, Burque. We celebrate each other's food, each other's music, each other's dance, heartbeat, drumbeat, sacred blessings from the Creator. We are flamenco and danza azteca, jingle dress and two-step, breakdancing and rancheras. Our heart beats to the rhythm that we live our lives to, our connection to the land, our mountain, this sky, our collective sweat and the tears in our eyes, memories that we share of river water and cottonwood trees, a symphony of chicharras, that hypnotizing zone, that hypnotizing drone in the late summer song that our daydreams dance to. In harmony, we hear our crickets take over the night, are singing with gritos that cry out to the sky when the sun sets behind the West Mesa and the sandias ripen for that brief fleeting moment before it gets dark when they turn pink. Our pink mountain's majesty holds us in our arms. Another night in the Duke City, another night in the Duke City where our hitos and hitas are safe and sleeping. The viejitas say their prayers and light their candles, and another Albuquerque summer is laid to rest to become memories and stories, the stories that we all share together as Burqueños. Thank you. You're on mute.
Hey, Valerie, you need to unmute. There you go.
Sorry about that. So thank you so much, Manny. One of the questions I wanted to start with is this beautiful cover. If all of you can see that, I hope all of you buy the book. But if you haven't, I'm interested in this cover because the image, there's a beautiful red. Can you see that? There's like an ochre reflection on the guy's hand hanging out of the car. So we have this beautiful series of cards, but I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that or if that's just something that I notice.
Well, it's the the photographer that took me out to the lowrider car show where we took these pictures was Joel Wigglesworth Photography, and he helped me design and make the cover. The colors that are there, I have to say, goes back to my daughter Sarita. She was taking a class at the time on color theory, and we were talking about different colors, and she said, "No, Dad, that's not blue, and it's not green. That's sepia." And like, I didn't know that color and I didn't know what it was, but she was like really obsessed with that color sepia, and we were talking about it, and at that time when we were making the book, and so I thought that that was a very good color to make it stand out in that way. And so I give her all the credit for giving me that design of that specific color, and the splash of red is there for the corazon in the city that we have. And what's interesting, well, what I found interesting about when I was designing the cover is that I use the word burque, but burque comes from Albuquerque, but when they changed that spelling and lost the first R in Albuquerque, it changes the word burque. Like there's not, that word isn't in there no more. So if you know the story is the man that painted the sign for the train station in Albuquerque spelled it wrong and left an R out of it. There should be another R. So that's why it says under Albuquerque Poems and Musings, I put that R back in there. It's right there in the corner. You can see that that's how the Duke of Albuquerque spelled his name. And so kind of that's why I put it there. And that's where the word burque comes from. And that's how we say that as being who we are and where we're from, like that.
Because it really is a gorgeous cover.
Okay. It is a gorgeous cover. And my daughter just came at me panicked. It is not sepia, it's cyan. That's the color that my book is. Sepia's brown, she said. And I mortified her with my mistake. But that's okay. We said it straight.
So one of the things as I read the books or the different poetry of the poets laureate, one thing that's really particular to you, they're all gorgeous, but is that you weave in the particular way that people talk. Some people would call it a dialect. And as we all know, in New Mexico, we have many of them. So I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that. It's so important in your work because with the descriptions of the landscape of Albuquerque, you really capture the way that people speak, and it really gives, I think, a sense, especially to someone who isn't from here, of who we are.
Well, like, let me tell you like this. I like to work with the young people in jails a lot, and sometimes when I go in there, people can come in with the best of intentions and we'll use our, I don't know, job interview voice to try to teach the kids. But it's when I come in there sounding like their favorite uncle, it kind of helps them put their guards down a little bit. If I tell them, bro, what you wrote was amazing, carnal, right on. That's a lot different than a teacher telling them, well done. You know, and once I saw that sparkle in their eyes, I knew that kind of, you know, our dialect is something that needs to be cherished and passed down to our kids. This is who we are. This is how we express ourselves. We use words that are only used here. And sometimes I see people on TV making fun of the way we talk, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes because I'm talking the way my grandpa talked. I'm talking the way my uncles from Española talk. I'm talking the way familia talks to each other when it's just familia in the room. And trying to, the way, you know, trying to make it so that I can write that into my poetry adds a little bit of authenticity to it. It adds a little bit of our corazon and our sangre into the words that I'm trying to weave into poetry that we're trying to show as who we are in that way.
Right, because language is culture, right? So that's what your poems do very beautifully is they preserve it. They communicate it, but they preserve it. So you want to read some more for us?
Sure. Okay. Now, I was saying that it leads good into what's coming up next is because this book of poetry is a book of poetry, but it's also a book of the stories that I wrote that inspired this poetry. I put a little bit of why I wrote what I wrote when I wrote these things. So I'm going to read this to you. My journey into poetry brought me into prisons. brought me to children in prisons, the children in prison. And I know that authentic self-expression has the power to heal, and our worries can be eased. Our stories hold value if we just write them. I work with incarcerated children to help them heal, and they heal their own spirits by writing their stories into poetry. Those stories, when told honestly, without trying to glorify the violence, they help put together the shattered hearts and help their lives get better. These kids, what I'm there to do is I'm there to tell them that the mistakes you made when you're young is not the measure you should use to judge yourself. You learn from those mistakes and get past them. And some of us made bigger mistakes than others, but that means you got a lot more wisdom to learn. And so that's kind of what I'm there to help with. And that's why I can't wait to get back into YDDC when we're meeting in person again. And so I'm going to share a poem with you that is about that in that way. The title of this poem is Walls Up and Protected. They came into the room skeptical and guarded, and we introduced ourselves to each other. To them, this is just a routine habit. I'm looking for a reason to praise them, hoping that they'll open up and talk to me. After we get to know each other a little bit, I get to introduce them to poetry. Now, poetry is an art form that either they don't know or they have bad connotations of. And I get to be the first one to grab their hearts and squeeze it and show them the power of this art form that I've learned to love so much. And with life and emotion, I tell them stories of pain and heartache, reality and hope. And with each poem, their walls start coming down. And at that perfect moment, when they start vibrating, I give them paper and pen and I ask them to begin to write their own stories, and the floodgates open. And when they write, what they write is real and raw. It's viscerally moving stories of mean streets, broken families, and bullshit bravado. They're mixed with powerful vulnerability. And I get to watch as they learn to use simile and metaphor to protect the parts that get exposed when we expose ourselves, when we express ourselves in this way. Excuse me. Forcing them to find power somewhere other than the barrel of a gun or their knuckles. First, I gotta go there first. I had to earn their trust by going there and bringing back tears and show them that even a strong man needs to cry sometimes. And they feel my catharsis, and they can see that it's okay for us to show our emotions, to be compassionate, and to stand up against injustice. I speak directly to the warrior spirit that is within us all, showing sincerity, and they can see it. And I give them some gimmicky writing assignment involving looking within ourselves and writing about what we find there. And they begin to define themselves by telling their stories, looking for the broken or sore parts in their hearts, and begin to heal. And together, we learn that this is how we stop making the same mistakes over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. This is how we stop making those same mistakes. This is how we find the lessons that we need to learn: mirror reflection, introspection, poetry, and healing. Now, I got into poetry by writing poetry that I kept in my notebook and kept to myself. Then I got into poetry through the poetry slam, and that helped me to perform. And then I started going into schools, but it wasn't until I sat with a young boy who was in prison for making a big mistake, and we cried together, and he wrote how beautiful his grandmother's eyes are and how he misses home. That's when I realized what poetry was. That's where I saw it's more than just simile and metaphor. It's a way for us to look within ourselves and find that authentic and sincere spirit, and find the parts that need to be healed. And some of us even need to be healed from the ancestral trauma that we carry around with us. And I love to write and read poetry, but it's when I can see that light up in a kid's face in that way that is like, wow, this is real. This has power. This is how we heal ourselves in this way. And so that has been where I've been following my poetry since then, and where I've been trying to find the kids that need that self-expression. It's fun to find the kids that are good at it, but when you find a kid that needs it, that's why I do what I do.
Mm. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, the Albuquerque Poet Laureate program requires the people who want to apply for the position to propose a community project. So the Albuquerque Poet Laureate program has an emphasis on serving the community and reaching the community. You were doing that before you were Poet Laureate. And then of course you did that as Poet Laureate. And so you've just really articulated that really, really powerfully. And I wanted to ask you, you know, do you stay in touch with some of the young people that you've worked with in detention centers or been incarcerated over the years? Have you heard from them as they've kind of gone on with their lives?
That's a touchy subject, because like once in a while I'll even see them and we're in public and I'm not allowed to say where I know them from, or even to, if they can come and talk to me, I can, you know, give them hugs. Well, we don't hug no more. I miss hugs. But, you know, but if I can't, like, hey, how are you doing? Because of where I met them. But yes, I do every once in a while have the privilege of bumping into them in public, or I get letters passed through their people all the way till it eventually gets to them. But yeah, I see that in fact, even today, I someone shared my this event, and they said that I had done a workshop with them a few days after they got out of jail, and it inspired them to look within themselves and do that personal inventory in their hearts and write it all out. And I always have that beauty of being able to have people tell me that kind of what we're doing here helped them in some way. Yes. And it's not me, it's poetry. I got to yell and share my poems with them, and then they saw the power and got to do it. I'm out there talking about the gospel of poetry more than like, it's not me that's doing it, it's the actual art form. And that's what I love about it so much. And that it's not in this great white tower of academia where only like people who studied poetry to get their PhD can do it. Kindergartners can write an authentic and sincere poem, and it's beautiful. And that's what I love about this art form.
And of course, the origins of this art form didn't happen in schools, right? The origins of poetry came out of community, right? From people.
Well, a lot of our ancestry has a spoken word tradition of how we pass down our traditions and culture in that way. None of it was written down, and a lot of it has to do with how our history was erased and how we only had the oral tradition to find our ancestral roots in that way.
And that comes into the poems quite a bit in this book, as does meditation, right? And you use that word om, and I was wondering if in working with youth you weave that in as well. So you're working with the poems, but do you guide them through meditation or just
You know what? Because I don't want to make parents mad. I'm not trying to talk religion or anything like that, but all we do is very deep breathing. And when you breathe deep, that's how we pull in that inspiration. That's how we get oxygen to our brains, and that's how we start to focus in order to find what we need to say and how we need to say it. So I use deep breathing techniques. I try not to say the word meditation because I don't want to turn anybody off or whatever connotations they might have with those words. So I just we breathe deeply and slowly and with intention and trying to pay attention to that. But I learned all my spirituality at a Carlos Santana concert, and so it includes from Om and Hindu and Buddhist, and where I find truth and where it rings true to my heart, I breathe in through my intention and add to my meditation in that way. But I understand that you gotta be very careful when dealing with other people's cultures and beliefs, and not to like appropriate something as being my own when it doesn't belong to me. But I do believe in these things and understand as Om being the vibration of the universe, and how to connect through deep breathing techniques. And this road that I've been walking since I was a young man, and kind of learning these things and picking up the truths as I find them as I'm walking this path.
And for those of you who have the book, you see these threads throughout the collection, which is really very powerful. Those of you who don't, you need to get the book so that you can see how Manny really weaves all this into one. You're being very humble about not having permission, but I think the poems do that work. Would you read?
And then we have our own set of our curanderismo, the curanderas that have taught us how to connect with the herbs, connect with the land, connect with the spirits, and connect with each other and ourselves in that way. And I remember when I was a kid, the curanderos were just like, your auntie's a curandera. And we didn't really talk about it. But now in this new generation, they're out there at the protests blessing the lines and burning our copal and saying our prayers to the four directions. And this is something that we had to reclaim as part of our culture that we lost in some way, that I feel is something beautiful that I now have to pass down to my children as being part of who we are, this belief system and this whole understanding of how spirit works and how we can connect to spirit through breath and through intention in that way. And these are things I try to weave into my poetry. This is how I encountered it, and this is why I believe these things to be true.
Great.
And not to be preaching at anybody or anything.
Will you read us some more poems?
Sure. Okay. Now, my father was he was in a band called Manny and the Casanovas, and that was a band that in the 60s and 70s was a band that kind of started the New Mexico tradition of music in that way. And as he got throughout his career, I'm trying to talk and find the poem at the same time. He was always up there with like El Hurricane and Tiny Mori and Manny and the Casanovas was a very big band, but he passed away when I was 18 months old. And so he was always just a story to me. He was something that was told to me. I don't have any real memories of my father. So what I have are his music, and I had his saxophone. And so I'm going to share with you in just a second. It's on page 12. I'm going to share with you these poems. But let me share with you a little bit about our music. In New Mexico, we have our own music, and it sounds like green chili with a rockabilly guitar. It's like the South Valley. It's like the South Valley of Burque played with saxophones. The music sounds like the Santuario sand, a good matanza, and the loneliest teardrop dripped into a shot of tequila. This is the music I grew up with. Every Sunday morning, my mother would clean her house, blasting Tiny Mori or Roberto Griego, and I would associate the smell of pine sol with the sound of rancheras. And we mark every wedding, funeral, quinceañera, birthday party, or any other reason to get together with our rancheras, our cumbias, our boleros. This music helps us perpetuate our culture. It keeps our family together, and it teaches us who we are. Music's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. And my father was the leader of a band called Manny and the Casanovas. And this band was one of the originators of New Mexico music. And I love his music. But it's not always easy to find it in our home, because he passed away from cancer when I was a child. And every time my mother would put on his music, she would cry. And so I would always associate my mother's tears with my father's music. But as I got older, I got to appreciate his music a little better. So here I'm going to share with you a little bit. The first poem I'm going to share is called Random Levers. Random levers. I was remembering my father's saxophone, remembering those days when I was angry at God for taking him from me. And I only had this brass instrument, a memory of him. It was his saxophone. He died when I was a baby. And instead of a father, I had these levers that I manipulated with my fingers and blowing onto some old cracked reed that once made music from my father's breath. But that man has always been a stranger to me. I would blow onto that saxophone, but without proper guidance and instruction, I could only play sour notes. I played myself into jail. Every time I tried to play a tone, all I could do was make mistakes, stumbling through life, blowing with all my might, but randomly pushing levers, just waiting for that music to come. Someday it'll come. Okay, that was about kind of my connection to my father was only through his saxophone. This one is about his passing, and it's called Casanova Senior. His doctor said he couldn't possibly father a child. He was too sick. He could hardly even hold his saxophone, but he was ready to be a father. And they tried once before, and she didn't have the strength to carry him full term. This time, she was determined. Every day, she made fresh tortillas, beans, and chili to fuel her and her baby, because only the food that she made with her own hands could stay down. They gave her the strength to complete that journey. The cancer had already ravaged his body, and the chemo had made his hair fall out, but he was still there. The doctors gave him 3 months. But he saw his son for 18 months before he finally was called home to meet his maker, leaving her alone with a child and his music.
Thank you. So we're going to open up for Q&A, and as you're typing things into the chat box, I just wanted to ask you one more question, Manny, and that's that what's really unusual about this book that you referred to, and you've just kind of give us sort of examples of this, is it has prose, it has poetry, it has a collaborative poem, it has memoir, it has biography, it has a lesson plan. And so I wanted, if you could just talk a little bit about why you wanted to put the book together this way, because it's really an exciting read, because you keep doing all of those things, and it's unusual for a book of poetry.
Because I wanted it to be a snapshot of who I was when I was poet laureate at that moment. And I was all those things. I am still trying to figure out and heal from my father dying when I was a baby. And all of us are healing and trying to figure out these kind of things. I am still on that path of my spirituality, trying to figure out who I am and where I'm going. I am still proud to be New Mexican and proud to be from Albuquerque. What I'm doing is trying to spread that gospel of poetry. And so I put that lesson plan at the end of it, because that's usually one of the first ones that I do when I get to work with students. And I wanted to show that one works with middle school kids, it works with college kids, it works with anybody that really wants to look within themselves sincerely in an authentic way. So that was part of who I was in that moment. I was the teacher, the bringing that into schools. Part of it's even, I was an activist. I was in protests representing what I believed and fighting for what was right. So I have some revolutionary type poetry in there of what I was thinking. And so all that craziness, all that sometimes scatterbrain is who I am on a daily basis. And sometimes I'm heartbroken, sometimes I'm excited and full of energy. But I think that's how we all are in some ways, and sometimes we're all sometimes everything.
Well, thank you, because it really makes the book very, very you, but also really special. And I think it's just a wonderful gift to us, this book. So now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who's really good at chat and Q&A. And so please, everybody, type your questions in, and Amanda, I'll let you do what you do really well.
Hello again. That was great. Thank you so much. I always love hearing Manuel's poetry, authentica. Okay, I had a question come to me directly during the performance, and that was wondering, Manuel, where folks should think about contributing money, either to a youth or writing organization that you might recommend.
I facilitate a writing workshop. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I thought you were. I
Okay.
facilitate a writing workshop called Low Writing, and you can find it on Facebook, and it happens on the first and third Tuesday of every month. And we come together as a community, and we write together, we cry together, and it's a beautiful thing. And I can put in the chat my ways that you could donate if you'd like.
All right, sounds good. I did link to that Facebook page a little bit earlier up in the chat. And then, yeah, if you have like a Patreon or a virtual tip jar too, you want to let folks know about, I know a lot of people here would like to help support your work. All right, does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask Manny? Let's see if we have any hands raised. I'm not seeing anything. Let's see here. We do have Jessica Helen Lopez in the house too, another Burque Poet Laureate. Jessica, if you want to chat with us, feel free. Let's see. All right. People are being very quiet and shy. You all said a lot of things, so maybe people are just feeling like, wow, we learned so much from that. Juliana Kerwin, she says, can you tell us a bit more about the lesson in your book?
You know what's most important about the lesson in that book that isn't in that book at all? And that's what I was talking a little bit about it, and I want us to do it together. If you have the means to do so right now, I want you to put your feet flat on the floor, and we're going to breathe. We're going to breathe together, because this breath is important. This breath is more than just what keeps us alive and keeping oxygen in our bodies. This is how we center ourselves, and it makes what we're doing, instead of being in all these different places and all alone with our computers, it's going to make a community and a circle about us being together. So I want you to breathe with me, in through your nose and out with your mouth.
All right, folks, a little yoga moment.
It does good for me, and it's a way that I pull in inspiration. It's a way that I call upon the spirits. It's a way that I start to focus and bring myself to the center. If you try this deep breath before you write, it'll help you pull in that inspiration. If you breathe with the intention to find your center, that's how we do it. Now, I'm ready to answer any questions if you have them. And if you don't, keep breathing like that. Breathe like that slowly and deeply for as long as you can. Keep doing it forever, because that's what it takes for us to truly find the inspiration to write that poetry. And after you breathe like that, then you can look at that lesson at the end of the book. And that lesson is usually the first one that I do when I go into a class. I make them write about their emotions. And it's a very simple lesson plan, but I make them describe their emotion as a color, or describe their emotion as a sound. But once you find the sound of your rage, it helps you to express yourself authentically in a way that makes it so that you can deal with these emotions in a positive way. What I try to tell the kids is it's better to breathe deeply and write a poem about what makes you angry than to bust your knuckles punching the wall, because sometimes we can get to that point. But if you can stop it before, if you can breathe deeply and you can try to be sincere and real with yourself and how you feel, well, then that's how we deal with our emotions, instead of getting ourselves in trouble or hurting ourselves in any way. And that's what that exercise at the end of the book is all about.